The Sons of Liberty is a politically neutral organization. We believe that the Judeo-Christian ethic has provided the principles upon which this nation was founded. It is our belief that these principles provide not only the foundation and framework for American government and society, but are also essential to the maintenance of a fair and just society. All program content is based on a Christian biblical worldview.
Good day, America. Welcome, Christians, conservatives, constitutionalists, liberals, libertarians, communists, Islamists, LGBTQ, RSTV, WXYZ people, all the boat rockers in the house, and anybody else I may have missed, to the Sons of Liberty radio show here on Red State Talk Radio, where we use the Bible and the Constitution, not to see who's on the right or the left, but who is on the straight and narrow. I'm your host, Tim Brown, coming to you live from the U.S.-occupied state of South Carolina, the editor at sonsoflibertymedia.com, and for Muslim friends, I'm the infidel that Allah warns about. I hold to the book, the Bible, as the authoritative word. Glad that you guys have joined us this morning. If you would like to check us out online, please do so. sonsoflibertyradio.com. Head over to sonsoflibertymedia.com. There you're going to see two videos at the top of the page. The one on the left side is Bradley's show from yesterday. He was sharing some things about his childhood, as well as meeting some of the cast from Little House on the Prairie. Pretty cool, I thought. Anyway, got to track them and speak with several of the cast that are still around. You can do so up until 3 o'clock, at which time he'll be live in that area. On the right side of the page is where we're at. Click on the play button. Look for the Rumble icon, bottom right-hand corner of that video, and then click on that, and you can join us in the chat on Rumble. We've got a lot of friends over there on the chat. So good morning, guys. Good to see you. And while you're there, please subscribe to that channel. It's Sons of Liberty Radio Live. Sons of Liberty Radio Live on Rumble. On the chat. Whoops. So that's me talking. That's how easy it works right there. All right. Okay. Real quickly, some of you guys are asking, okay, what do we play through the pre-show? Because normally we play some music there. Well, what I was doing was I was giving you a sort of a video bio, if you want to call it that, of our guest this morning, because he has been in film industry for some time now. He's got more than 35 years of experience in New York City television, movies, and commercials. Brings his professionalism and expertise to the artists in Nashville, where things are a little too a lot friendlier, easier on the nerves than New York City. I'm sure that it probably is. And David has had a time where he's been attacked for some things in the past. He came out with another trailer that he had put together in a low budget because of what he came out about, and he was attacked all over the place and censored in many ways, and this was several years ago. And so they were experiencing a lot of what the Sons of Liberty were experiencing at the time as well, and couldn't get their message out to get crowdfunding for Christian films, Christian stories that were to be films. And David had a heart for young people, so he was going for the 3D route and all these kinds of things as well. And so he's joining me this morning because he's got a new film based on real events out of World War II, and it's my privilege to welcome to the Sons of Liberty, David Rosler. Good morning, man. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, David, listen, why don't you people saw the little video introduction there. Why don't you help people understand a little bit about who you are, what you have engaged in, and how you've got to where you're at right now?
Well, I tell you, I'm really bad at self-promotion. So I wish my associate producer was on because she could talk your ear off. Well, you pretty much saw everything on the reel. If you want a brief history, I made my first little 8mm movie when I was a kid at the age of 7, and I was hooked. That was it. I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And my first feature, I was an animator and a camera operator on a little thing that didn't go anywhere called My Go Pogo, but it had some good voice talent. I had Jonathan Winters and Vincent Price and a bunch of other people. It was a stop motion feature, which most people call claymation, but they call too many things claymation that aren't claymation. From there, worked with Lou Bunnan, who is a legend in that kind of animation. Unbelievably blessed in terms of a career. Unbelievably blessed. And then started getting into storyboarding, which is the heart of cinematic direction. And then got into direction, and then doing visual effects all the while. I was all over New York City. I mean, I had about 10, 15 years where I was just having the time of my life. I wasn't sleeping at all, but I was having the time of my life. All of these things, when you've done stop motion, if you do any of it on your own, you have to learn virtually all the disciplines of cinema. You have to camera, direction, acting through the performance of the stop motion character, sculpting, casting the sculptures. So that's a pretty wide net in terms of creative and technical and artistic work. And it just sort of, grew from there. And then ultimately over the years, the digital revolution came, digital cinema and editing, which I loved because I never liked editing film. It was, to me, it kind of made my teeth itch, and it felt like I was always filing index cards, these long pieces of film. They'd hang into a bin, and you cut them together, and you splice them with glue. That I never liked. So when digital editing came along, well, totally my glory. And now forget it. I mean, it's beautiful.
Well, David, one of the things that you were saying there, you were talking about the clay animations. And I tell my kids, remembering back when I was a kid, you'd watch some of these Jason and the Argonauts
Oh,
and what was the other Sinbad and stuff like that, and then you'd have the Christmas specials with and I called them, they were clay anime. I would call them the hard people. That's what I called them, and yeah, that's a fascinating thing. And when we had a couple of young people over here just across the line in North Carolina, and they had put together a fantastic little Lego movie about the story of the walls of Jericho falling. And it was so clever. I mean, some people in the audience may have seen it. I forget what it was called, but they had humor in it. They had the biblical account of the people, trusting in the Lord and stuff. And obviously they're ad-libbing some things in there, but it was fantastic. But I talked to them at this homeschooling convention, and they were talking about how long it took them to produce just a short, couple of minutes of video footage, because they had to go and meticulously move the little legs, move the little arms, take a shot, move the little legs, move the little arms, take another shot, do things on the face. It was absolutely incredible. And I'm sure that the clay animation was a lot like that. So when you start to move, I don't know if that's easier on the film producer, not having somebody they have to direct, but they're doing all the stuff themselves, or if it's easier to actually have somebody you can tell, I want this from you, perform this for me. Maybe you can speak to that.
yeah. But you said something that I need to comment on. You said Jason and the Argonauts and Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. The auteur behind those films, who was also the special effects genius, but he wasn't just doing the special effects. He and his producer get together, and he would bring a series of drawings to the producer. The producer, Charles Schneer, would then take them to Columbia, and once they had a hit, he would just show Columbia Pictures, the producer, Ray's drawings, and they bankrolled the movie. They made 17 features like that. His name was Ray Harryhausen, and he was actually my childhood hero. And I got to know him very, very well in London in the last 15 years of his life. And so for you to bring up Jason and the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and the Golden Voyage of Sinbad and 20 Million Miles,
Hercules, the whole night. I can remember when I was a kid, and I was telling my boys this like a month ago. I said, when I was a kid, there was a summer film feature, if you will. And so my mom would buy the ticket. It was like $7 or $10 or something. And like every week they had, some kind of movie that came out. And a lot of them were those kind of movies right there. And they would have them, you go to the theater over here. Now they don't even have the theater in Gastonia, but we'd go over there, and it was a really good bargain, because when you went in, I think you even got a drink and popcorn. And can people imagine that? Drinking popcorn for your kid every time he goes, and he's seeing the movies for like, I don't know, it was like $7 or $10. It was nothing. It was nothing now when I look back, and now I see how inflation has taken that. Would cost you probably $200 today or something. It would be ridiculous. But David,
was she taking all of her kids for $10?
No. I was the only kid at the time.
Oh, okay.
So she got this summer pass, and we'd go together. Anyway,
let me speak to your question, if I may.
Go ahead.
See if I can answer it. You said, is it easier or harder to either do it yourself or have somebody else do it? And that really depends on how much you love the medium itself, how determined you are in your own specific vision for what you want to do, and whether you have a good working relationship with whoever it is you want to do the work. Personally, I've always felt that I prefer to do those things like the visual effects myself, because I have a specific way of looking at a particular project. Can I delegate? Sure, you have to. It's a medium where everybody works together. But and as far as the meticulous nature of the work, it's a funny thing with stop motion. If you're into it, I couldn't do it anymore. It's not that I'm physically unable, although my back would hurt. I've just sort of been spoiled by being the director and live actors, and because it is extraordinarily grueling work. But when you're younger, and when you're really impassioned with it, an odd thing happens. You just get lost in the performance, because good stop motion, just like good animation of any sort, is not simply moving the characters. It's performing. You're acting for the characters.
Yeah, and that's sort of what that was what I was kind of getting at, David, was not doing it yourself versus the other, but working with inanimate objects versus working with a real actor. That was what I was talking about. Which one is easier?
Sometimes they're one and the same. I didn't say that. Goodness gracious! No, you could have every actor after me now.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, again, it really depends on the project. The kind of things I've been doing in live action, I would never attempt in a million years in animation. And films that are, it really depends. Some films are simply, some stories are best realized in live action, and some are best realized in animation. That's not only because live actors are real and animation does things you can't or couldn't do in live action. It's that the story kind of dictates what medium is best, just like when you decide on which medium you're going to go with, whether it's the style that's correct visually. You're going to go for a film noir or cinematic style. You're going to go for a bright and upbeat and energetic and colorful style. It really depends on the story. So as Orson Welles once said, movies get themselves made every way you can think of. And it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. It really depends on what you want. What I can't believe is that, and I understand why Hollywood is turning out such bad stuff. What I don't understand is why younger filmmakers seem to be intimidated by the old films of the 40s. And granted, they were magnificent films. But I tell them, like, look at this episode of the old black and white 1960s Twilight Zone. They had absolutely antique equipment. The magazine that holds the film would only run 12 minutes worth of 35 millimeter film. Obviously, you're recording the soundtrack on a separate thing, and all that had to be synced up. And I would show them, and I'd say, look, you see this episode where it's got nothing but moving camera dolly shots and crane shots, all of which need to be coordinated, rehearsed with the actors, so that the camera and the actor lands at the right spot at the right point in the frame, and the actor is comfortable enough with it that his performance is very natural and engaging with the audience. I say, there's a 20-minute show. They shot it in 3 days. Now, granted that the crew was left over from the MGM Hollywood crew, but I said, they had to wait for the rushes to see what they shot. You were reliant on the cameraman looking through a glass lens to tell you whether it looked good or not. You've got, you just sit there and you look at the monitor now, and everything is so instantaneous. You have photographic ranges digitally that would have been impossible, literally impossible, certainly in color in the old days. And even with color film, I mean, the early color films, they required tons of light to be able to get any kind of exposure. I say you should be turning out masterpieces. You've got all the tools.
Yeah.
They're like a rocket ship traveling to the nearest star with a jet propelled rocket ship, and you guys are like warp speed. You should be sailing right past the quality of those classic films. But the Hollywood studios did have an advantage, had nothing to do with their size, had nothing to do with their technology. It had to do with the fact that they gathered up the best in the world, the writers, the actors, everything, and they groomed them and they cultivated them. See what actor looks good and what kind of costume, what kind of delivery works for him. Is he good in period pieces? Is he good contemporary? Those things are very tough to compete with, but you can balance that off with the speed. And ease and low budget. I mean, it used to be you needed real money just to make any kind of a sound movie. Now you point the camera and you put the mic next to the person, and 4K and clear sound. So but they get intimidated, and part of that reason is the fact that what Hollywood turns out is really bad. It's bad on. It isn't just the content and the writing and the stiff acting from people who were just picked off the street because they had a pretty face and had never gone through the process of acting on the stage and working their way up, on bit parts in studio movies, and then they get maybe a featured role, and then before you know it, if they're very, very lucky, they would be a star. The unions just crush any ability to be creative on the set because time is so expensive.
Yeah.
And the moment you're on the set, you can't adjust lights. Look, you never see key lights anymore. It's all just soft blanket lights. They throw these big blanket lights up, and then they shoot all day long on that setup.
David, one of the things is when you, and I want to get to the point of what we're doing, but I'm glad you're giving people a little bit of background about you, about your profession, because maybe some people haven't even thought about what all goes in to producing any kind of film and the time and setting up things. I'm always amazed that people can take a book, and I'm a firm believer. There's very few films that I've ever seen that can top the book, because in the book you're creating all that stuff in your mind of the story. You're putting voices to people. You're putting a face on them. You're creating the scenario there, and I've just always found that the Lord has given us a mind that can create all that, in thought from the Word, and I'm just always amazed at that. But here's the thing: you've obviously got a lot of experience with things, and years ago, you guys were being censored as you tried to do some crowdfunding for a film you were doing called Orbiter, and that was a 3D film. Now you're out with a new one. And it's called God's Armored. And my understanding is that this is, and maybe you can correct me on this, this is based on actual events. And did this involve your father? Because when I went to the website, I saw these pictures of your father from World War II. Did this involve him at all? And do you want to tell us a little bit about tell us what this story is about that you made this film about?
Yeah, the story itself does not involve his experiences, but the fact that he was in Operation Husky, which most people actually have not heard of it. It was one of the huge Allied invasions. It was the invasion that took down Mussolini's fascist Italy and took out 1/3 of the axis of evil. They had 150,000 troops, 2,000 some odd warships. It was enormous, and he was in that. He was right there in the. It's not like he was mopping up, the grounds afterward. He was right there in the invasion, and there were over almost 3,000 American troops killed. So I'm certainly glad that didn't happen to him. Or we wouldn't be talking today.
Correct, yeah.
I kind of thought about his experiences, but wound up crafting an entirely different story because I wanted to do sort of a very small psychological thriller. Oh, that's nice of you. Thank you for putting that up there.
Yeah, I couldn't get the site to come up. It kept rolling over and rolling over. I was wanting to bring that up so people could see some of these images.
Yeah, that's my dad on the right. And I don't know who that one on the left is. And what's interesting, I think I'm going to do a coffee table book because I didn't realize what I had inherited from him. I've got a big book, scrapbook of photographs. These photographs were not fixed up. They're in pristine condition. And on the back, he made notations on almost everything. Plus, I have postcards that his parents, my grandparents, had saved. where he's writing and telling where he is, and you can see the postmark. As far as God's armor is concerned, the story concerns starts out with a lone U.S. tanker whose crew has been killed, was killed when an ordnance exploded and the hatches were open. And that could wipe out a whole tank crew. And that also takes out his radio. And it's in the middle of the blizzards on this particular day, Christmas Eve. And perhaps, in answer to a prayer, a British colonel comes out of the snow. Hello there, that kind of thing. And once the tanker knows that the colonel is safe to be around, he's not a false flag, there begins a relationship with them. And then the third soldier comes out. And the question is the third soldier an American, or is he a false flag Nazi? And the British colonel has some has some real problems with Nazis, because as a very young man, he had been in World War I, and it had disfigured his face somewhat. Nothing gross for the audience. I wouldn't do that to the audience, but scars and so forth. And looking at the screen, there he is yelling. And he can be a little unhinged when it comes to Germans. And so the drama, the World War II drama, segues into a psychological thriller and a psychological suspense thriller. And it's very Christian. And again, you can do that realistically in a story like this, because if you're looking at death by just not necessarily a bullet, but just by the bitter cold. And many of the soldiers froze to death in northern Germany in their tanks. They didn't have heat. How a crew of 4, and we had an operational World War II tank. Kathy, my associate producer, managed to make all the contacts, this labyrinthine kind of arrangement of contacts that got us a working World War II Stuart tank, which are very small, and which only adds to the claustrophobia in the story, frankly. You can't imagine how they survived and kept their morale up and went through what they went through, because it wasn't just the hardship of battle. The tanks were well-known death traps. It wasn't until the end of the war that they even put escape hatches in the bottom of the tank for the front crew. If the turret above them had turned just a little bit this way or a little bit that way, it would block the hatches and they couldn't get out in the event the turret was hit or caught fire.
I was going to say, so many of them probably just burned to death in the tank.
Unfortunately, that's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. And they knew what they were getting into, and yet they went out there and fought. It's difficult to imagine today's generations showing that kind of determination to fight for freedom and that kind of wild courage to get through that sort of stuff. I researched this for several months before I wrote the screenplay, and then after the screenplay was done, we got the tank and we got experts involved correcting me. Pardon me, I don't know what's wrong with me this morning. Could be the hour. I can't. For instance, the whole thing about the turret turning, I didn't know that, and blocking the hatches. I didn't know that, so of course I had to write it into the screenplay. And so even once we were preparing to shoot, I was doing a lot of last-minute revisions on the screenplay to try to get these details at least into the dialogue without them seeming as though, they weren't organically growing out of the conversations. You don't want to just say something and have it look like it's been stuck in sideways because somebody told you something at the last minute. Writing Hollywood does not seem to be capable of anymore. It's absolutely shocking how poor most of the screenplays are. I've shown younger crew members on projects that go, back years. Say, watch this movie, see something from the 1940s or even the 1950s. They can't believe it because they had never seen them. They were never exposed to them. They couldn't believe the writing and the cinematography and everything else. The art form has really devolved very seriously between the unions and now particularly with the woke guys in Hollywood, because what they do, they won't hire you unless you're really in lockstep with their social and political beliefs. And because of that, because they can't get along with anybody else, they rob themselves of about 90% minimum of the available creative workforce.
Well,
And
David,
that's just bad business.
let me bring something up there. You were targeted for coming out in such a fashion where they cut you off, and there was a young lady. I'm trying to recall her name. We had her on the show, but she was a storyteller as well, and she started something down here in Georgia. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what the young lady's name is. I'll have to find it, and maybe I can throw that in the archive. The interview I did with her, but I've got to remember her name. But a lot of people are starting their own, especially some Christians, and she was one, are starting their own studios. They can do it a whole lot, like what you said, less expensive. Sometimes maybe not up to the greatest quality of what you'll see come out of somewhere out of a studio or something, but the stories they have, the people that are involved, I'm starting to see now, people are getting other people who don't want to be pushed into that kind of a system where we're hearing about pedophilia, satanic rituals, all this kind of stuff, but they do enjoy acting. They enjoy storytelling and things of this nature. And so, she was setting up basically her own studio, and she wanted to help others make their stories sort of come to life, if you will, for others to teach certain principles and certain things like that. And you're saying this film here, despite it being on actual events, there was something there where God was in the midst of it, and the
Yes.
Bible was being used. Can you give people a little insight as to what's going on in the story and how that's relevant to this soldier's faith in the midst of it?
Um,
Without giving too much away.
Spoilers. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to answer that question without spoilers, because all of those things are very interwoven throughout the entire story, from literally the beginning to the end. So it's because there's a great deal of discussion, there's a great deal of realization and revelation among one or two soldiers. Maybe someone needs to learn a thing or two, but it's very. I can say that it's extremely scriptural. The film starts out with a prayer. The young tanker driver sergeant starts out with a prayer, and then within a few moments he hears the hello of the British colonel at a distance. And then they kind of, there's this discussion in the snow, him holding his gun at the colonel several yards away. And they're kind of sort of feeling each other out to see whether the other one is safe. Because there was a lot of that in World War II, a lot of false flags. A lot of people dressing up in enemy uniforms and saying, come here, come here, come here. When they'd run over, they get gunned down. But again, because of things that had happened in the past, and because we are Christian, and because let me put it this way, I am Christian, and my associate producer Kathy, who's my right hand, my right arm on this thing, is Christian. We were kind of noticed and targeted by some very, very, very malicious people who worked inside Twitter, and they apparently knew people who worked inside Facebook. One thing I think I need to bring up so that your audience understands what the censorship is all about. Everyone kind of talks about the censorship as though it's something that is approved on a per person basis from the top of the company, from the CEO or something. It's not. They have hundreds, sometimes thousands of employees. And if their culture is as malicious as the woke extremist culture is, they know they can just do anything they want. So if one person alone decides that they don't like where you're taking your potential influence with other social media users, they'll only just press a button. Doesn't have to go up to the top. They just take care of it for themselves, and they enjoy it. And from what I've seen of behind the scenes videos, these people, I don't mean to sound cruel, but they're real social misfits. You can see it. You can see it. They don't speak well. Their conversations are awkward. Their manner is kind of strange. And these are the people that the bad guys, we'll just call them the bad guys, just like they did in Nazi Germany, speaking of World War II, just like Stalin did. These are the people they exploit by giving them a sense of belonging. You have a home with us, and you will be appreciated, and you will be a general in the new world order, whatever it is. And
it's no different than a gang, is it, David? I mean, gangs do that for young boys that don't have fathers, or their families. We'll be your family. Come on in with us.
Yes, in that respect, yes. But 100%. When I was until things really fell apart, because they closed down Nashville for COVID, and man, I've been clawing my way up ever since. Because you can't make a Christian film in New York City. You can't unless you just walk into the city with tens of millions of dollars and just buy your way through it. And even then, you're not going to get the best actors because they'll be afraid that their careers will be ruined if they act in it. It's awful. But when I was in Nashville, I went to a Black Lives Matter autonomous zone. And I'd wear like a striped shirt, like a multicolored striped shirt, and walk through, and people give me some funny looks, but there were enough white people there, and I just kind of give them a little fist up, as though I was one of them, because I wanted to try to understand them. That's what I didn't get. I didn't get what was motivating them, and I ran, and it started to occur to me that what I was seeing were some very unpleasant, power mad people at the top, but the rest were these awkward people who didn't fit in. I mean, you'd have hundreds of people listening to speakers, and even when they weren't listening to speakers, they'd be sitting together, maybe lots of people into side by side, friends, couples, whatever, not talking to each other.
That's really a strange thing. Let me ask you this, David, because we got about 10 minutes here.
Oh,
with the film that you're doing here, God's Armored. You're not going to give us the spoilers, so we're just going to let that one go.
That's right.
We're going to let that one go. How
close
are you to being done? And I know you guys have been trying to do, and I don't want to get way off in the political, the censorship across numerous social media platforms, your website, probably emails and everything else, because we get the same thing. They even are keeping our emails. Third parties are keeping our emails from people who have contracted with us through double authentication, saying, I want your email. They're saying, no, you can't have it because we think they may. If you guys notice that on social media, when they give you a ban, a strike, or whatever, you may have done this. They don't say you have done this and what rule is being violated. They say you may have done this and see our community standards. You can figure it out for yourself. But you guys were heavily targeted in that on the Orbiter film. What about this one? How close are you to being complete with God's Armored? And how can, if people wanted to help get this out to the theaters, how could they do that and help you guys push this out there?
basically, I'm doing the polish on the edit now, so it's very close. Um, and I don't mean a polish on the edit like 8 months. I mean a polish on the edit like maybe 6 weeks. Um, if they want to help, they can go to God's Armored, and God bless you all. We certainly pray that you do. There are 3 ways that you could donate. There's GiveSendGo, which is a Christian fundraising platform. There's the website. There you go. God's Armored. That's without an apostrophe S on the website. So it's GODSAMOR AMORED.
ARMORED. Armored.
Yeah, man. Well, it's still early. As far as I'm concerned, I'm still waking up.
You're good.
And they're and if you went past it, if they want to see it, those are some of their options. If you could scroll back up, there you could see some of right there, down a little bit, because you can show. There you go. There you are. There's some options.
Yep, the link there for the giving is on that website as well.
And you can also send through Venmo or Cash App. And if anyone is interested in investing, they can call it 615-439-0161. We're still taking a few investors if need be. It would be lovely if people could simply support us. I know you've got a very big audience. So quite frankly, this was always a small film, although it is in stereoscopic 3D because of my associate producer. She loves 3D. And she says, just think of how great those storms are going to look in 3D. And darn it, she was right. So I can't argue about it. A true stereoscopic 3D. It's not faked. It was shot with 2 lenses and, the whole 3D experience. And they can also watch it in 2D for people in your audience who say, "Oh, it hurts my eyes," and it does for many people. They've got the 2D version of it. We're I don't know what else to say. We're close, and we really need your help, and everyone. And if I know the kind of audience size you had, if everybody just gave $1 or $2, would get us over the line, because we need some overhead finance to until the thing is finished, and then we have to have the deliverables to the theaters. And once it's in the theaters, it's funny that you mentioned that girl you were talking about. I wanted to start her studio, because we had one, and we lost it when COVID hit. And what our plan was exactly like hers. First movie goes in, makes money. With that money, we start searching out young Christian filmmakers who have an idea and some talent, and we say, "Here's your money. We take 10% for distribution. We'll distribute it, take 10%, and that's it. You keep the rest. If you wind up being a competitor, God bless you. Let's fill all the theaters with Christian movies." And that's always been our plan. But these awful people, you can't on social media who run it. No business, whether it's a lawyer, a baker, anybody else, can survive without some social media presence. All the money we've raised from investors, it hasn't been all that much, had to be done just simply local networking, which is very slow and very difficult. And frankly, I think our reservoir is getting tapped out now. So if every one of them, or even half of them, gave a couple of bucks, doesn't have to be 5 or 10 or 20. You've got a big audience. And if they could go to godsarmor.com and help out, in my opinion, they'd be doing God's work, because that's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
I could have made a fortune in Hollywood just preaching the other message, but I can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. That's very important. I want to make sure that people on the radio are catching that, because they're not seeing the visuals and stuff. It is armored, as in ED, not just armor. So when you do it, it's God's Armored. The lady that I was speaking of, this was back in 2019. You may have heard of her, you may not. I'll put this in the archive. I may have to end up re-downloading the video, because when we lost our YouTube channel, I've just been going back as I see them missing and downloading them from Facebook.
YouTube killed your channel?
Yeah, it took down. We lost. I think I lost 2 channels, and Sons of Liberty lost 2 channels. I lost a Twitch channel twice. We lost Vimeo twice.
Speaking of Nazis,
But
you know?
but this is
Really?
the young lady here. Her name is Tiffany Fitzhenry. Some of you guys have heard of her, and she's a story writer, and they're developing some things also to produce films as well. But Tiffany was exposing a lot of the stuff that she left out of Hollywood, back in the day. So she was sharing a lot of that stuff with us. I think it's a pretty informative interview as to why she did what she did. She didn't stay focused on that, but she said, we need stories that uplift. We need things like what the Bible says when it talks about us, what we think. Think on things that are lovely, beautiful, all these kinds of things. Yes, in the midst of even the Bible, there's terrible sinful acts and stuff, but they're all geared in pointing us to the one who is beautiful and magnificent and glorious, and that is the Christ who gave himself for sinners. So, there has to be that contrast that you have, so that it's kind of like you may be familiar with my friend Brian Godawa, and he wrote the screenplay for To End All Wars, which is based off a true story of World War I. I got to tell you, in my mind, it is one of the most fantastic, authentic movies that communicate the true gospel that I have ever seen. And I don't recommend it for kids simply because of the language that's used in it. It is a wartime kind of film, but it is how the gospels communicate. How a guy, and I'm not going to throw a spoiler either, but he lays down his life not only for his friends, but even for his enemies, and teaches the men, the POWs, to do the same. So I'm all for, if we can put that in the minds of people, the teachings of Christ, even if it comes through in a story like that, a parable, if you will, I'm all for doing that. Get that in the minds and the hearts of the young people, especially, and the older people. The older people need it. I got to tell you, in this country, many of them need it just as much as the young people. So I'm glad to see this kind of thing going on. We got about 2.5 minutes here, David, and I want to give those to you. As I always end with a final word of exhortation. So you got about 2.5 minutes. Give that final word of exhortation to the audience, and then if you'll point them over to your site and where they can help support you.
Well, why don't you give us a prayer?
Well, I'd rather you go ahead and give the exhortation. I for most times I save my prayers for private. I have prayed if there's something really desperate going on, but I'd like for you to give the people a final word of exhortation and speak to them about and just point them over to your websites.
For everyone, dear God, we thank you for the life you've given us, for the blessings that we have, certainly here in the United States in this day and age in which we were born, comfort and abundance that had never been known on this world before. For this, God, we cannot thank you enough. We love you. We cherish you. We cherish the beauty that you create through nature. And God bless all of the listeners of Sons of Liberty who may at these difficult times be having problems, certainly financial as we are and otherwise. Help them through these times until things get better. And God bless, frankly, people like Tim, who speak your word and project your love to an audience, to uplift them every day, to give them hope, to give them emotional charity, which is not spoken of enough. And we thank you once again for what you've done for all of us in the life you've given. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. David Rosler, thank you so much. Check him out at godsarmored.com, godsarmored.com. David, hang on, and I'll say goodbye to you off air. Bradley be with you guys at 3. Lord willing, we'll be back with you in the morning. Gary Waterman's going to be on. See you then.